Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live on a Monday afternoon with reactions off of what was a pretty action-packed Week 8. We do still, of course, have the Monday Night Football game tonight between the Giants and the Steelers that we will be previewing later on in the show. But before that, got to dive into the biggest moments and storylines from Sunday. We're going to start off by talking about the New York Jets, who lost their fifth straight game, this time coming to one of the worst teams in the NFL in the New England Patriots. So we'll discuss that. We will discuss the Sunday Night Football matchup between the 49ers and the Cowboys. The Niners, propelled by a dominant third quarter, were able to coast to a victory here as the Cowboys fall below 500 once again. We will then be talking about the matchup between the number 1 and number 2 overall pick in Caleb Williams versus Jaden Daniels, which was an absolute thriller down the final few minutes of that game. And then finally, we are also going to be talking about the Kansas City Chiefs remaining undefeated with their win over the Las Vegas Raiders. So a whole lot to dive into. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker for our video viewers, gsmcpodcast.net, or you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube in order to get your comment to pop up on screen for everyone to see. All you have to do is leave a tip or donation. Anything would be very greatly appreciated on that front. Starting off, Week 8 in the NFL featured a lot of big games and moments, but really the most meaningful one, at least in terms of the public eye, is the New York Jets, who lost their fifth straight game. This is a team that a lot of people had Super Bowl aspirations for, and yet they have just been an absolute nightmare over the past few weeks, and now we're going on about a month. September 19th, I believe, is the last time that the Jets won, and they come into this game against a Patriots team that has been reeling over recent weeks. You end up getting Drake May knocked out of this game in the first half. Felt like the ultimate get-right spot for the Jets, and yet instead they end up falling short as their offense continues to not be able to produce enough for them. They lose this game 22-25. Aaron Rodgers, 17 of 28, 233 yards, 2 touchdowns. So not necessarily a bad statistical outing for Rodgers. And really, when you look at the team as a whole, it's not like the Patriots were able to dominate this game in any particular fashion. It was just about, again, these timely ends of drives where the Jets, a couple weeks now, really going back to that loss against the Broncos, they have had kicking miscues late in games, and other teams have been able to come through in some of those moments. And it was Jacoby Brissett, putting together a 70-yard touchdown drive at the end of this one to be able to secure the victory. And it just seems like the Jets, on the other hand, they've been unable to really, put their foot down in some of these games. Dan Orlovsky tweeted out, Dan Orlovsky of ESPN tweeted out a stat. I know there have been a couple different iterations of this stat, but the Jets scored 20 or more points. They did not turn the ball over, and they held their opponent in the Patriots to under 250 total rushing yards in the past. And in the NFL history, teams who have done so have been 750-0, and the Jets became the first team to check off all of those requirements and still lose. So massively disappointing there. I do want to talk about Rodgers and the overall functionality of this offense because it is a mess. And the Jets were actually, able to move the ball in this game against the Patriots yesterday, but I mentioned coming up in big spots. It's also just not putting yourself behind the sticks. And the Jets have been struggling with negative plays all throughout the season. And another note from this year, and it's something that noticed going back to week 1 when the Jets played against the 49ers, and I think I even noticed it a little bit more so in the second game against the Titans, is the fact that they have been butting heads with the play clock all season long. And that was another issue for them in this game against the Pats, where in the first quarter, they burned all 3 of their first half timeouts in that first quarter because they kept getting to the end of the play clock and they were trying to avoid delay of game penalties. So they used all 3 of their timeouts in the first half, trying to avoid getting delay of game penalties. They used another one in the second half, and they also took an additional 2 delay of games throughout the course of the game as well. And it is just so hard to fathom that Aaron Rodgers, who has been doing this for 20 or so years now in the NFL, that he is the headmaster of an offense that can't even get a play called and get everybody into formation, within the span of the play clock. Like, that just does not make any sense to me. And sure, a lot of people, and deservingly so to some degree, are going to point to Todd Downing, who's taken over as the play caller. There's certainly dysfunction in terms of the coaching on this offense, but at a certain point, Aaron Rodgers, he's making adjustments at the line of scrimmage, running up this clock. There seems to be a lack of understanding for whatever reason of this entire situation, and it's just so uncharacteristic of a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who throughout his entire career has been so timely, so methodical, been on top of it, just a heads-up quarterback that, I'm not saying it's entirely on his shoulders, but at some point, you can only point the blame at so many other people and fire so many other people before you have to eventually look yourself in the mirror. And the reality of the situation is, this is not a good Patriots defense. I know that that's been their mantra, especially in recent years, but given all of the injuries that they've sustained, this is a Patriots defense that has been struggling a lot up to this point in the season. You go through, the majority of the stats, they are in that bottom third in total defense, in passing defense. They're actually, slightly below average in rushing defense, which I suppose is a little bit of a win for them. It's just insane to me that this Jets offense does look as dysfunctional as it is. And, I thought that the offensive line did a pretty solid job in this game. Sure, there are a number of plays where Aaron Rodgers is avoiding sacks and scrambling out of the pocket. So I'm definitely not going to say there was no pressure up front. He only sacked once, though. The running game was solid for them. Breece Hall with a fine game, 16 carries for 80 yards. Ultimately, you'll take that kind of efficiency for Breece Hall, who has been a little bit quieter this season. But the entire operation is just off right now. Davante Adams is really yet to make a real imprint on this offense, and it's not the most surprising thing in the world to me. I was somewhere in the middle with the whole Davante Adams to the Jets thing, where I certainly didn't think it was going to solve all of the Jets' issues. I stand by that they should have made the deal, because at this point, they're so bought in ever since they traded for Rodgers last offseason and ahead of the 2023 season, that it's about, really the goal was to win a Super Bowl when it first, came to be. Then as, expectations sort of dwindled a little bit, it's more so just about making the playoffs and at least having a fun team that Jets fans can look back fondly on. And this has to be one of the most disappointing, Jets teams, definitely Jets teams, probably New York teams in general. The reality of the situation is, I don't think that there were that many people that were going ahead and, considering the Jets to be true Super Bowl contenders. I mean, to some degree, like I was pretty low on them coming into the season. When I first did their initial preview of the season, I had them winning 8 wins. I got talked into 9 wins by the end of it. And to be fair, the Jets, they have a manageable schedule in front of them where there are a lot of opportunities to pick up wins, but it's not like they have any cupcakes on their schedule either. I guess, at Jacksonville week 15 is the easiest one. Outside of that, the rest of the teams are theoretically in the hunt for a playoff spot. So, at this point, I have an extremely hard time imagining that the Jets are going to be able to work their way back into the season. Talked about their offense, definitely, but, the defense is a significant part of that as well, and I don't want to bury their defense necessarily this morning because, again, they did hold the Patriots to under 250 yards, and it's not like, their defense got gashed by any means, but at some point you need to come up with the big stops, and they were unable to do so. It's not like, this is a bad Patriots offense that was able to, again, drive down the field 70 yards, and ultimately, it didn't look pretty down the stretch there. It came down to a 4th and goal at the 1-yard line, but you got to come up with the stops eventually. And the Jets are, going on a handful of weeks now where they have been really struggling in terms of just generally speaking what their defense has been able to do to limit opposing teams. And so again, I at least want to mention the defense, that it has also been part of the story this year, and kicking as well. I mean, Greg Zuerlein, I would be surprised if he continues to be on the roster moving forward. I think I might have seen a quote that says they aren't planning on making a change there. So, let me know in the comment section if that there is any confirmation there, but I believe they flashed a graphic during the game yesterday that Zuerlein has now missed the most field goals in the NFL this season. He missed an extra point as well, and you're talking about 3 games now this year where Zuerlein took points off of the board, the Broncos game, the Bills game, and the Patriots game now, where Zuerlein hits some of these kicks, and ultimately the Jets do come out on top. So really, their organization as a whole is just so dysfunctional right now, and I don't know what exactly is going to happen that flips the switch other than Aaron Rodgers, returning to an MVP. Not even MVP. I mean, he's on the bottom half of the NFL right now in terms of quarterbacks based off of how he's playing. He's probably, closer to 20 than he is to 10 at this point. I would feel pretty confident in saying that. And again, I feel like it's a lazy argument to just pin it on the quarterback. That's not what I'm saying at all. That there are a number of different issues with this Jets team. It's just the fact that Aaron Rodgers was sort of brought in to be this savior. And I think what I saw is that through 8 games of the season, the Jets had actually scored more points last year than they have this year. Now, feel free to fact check me on that in the comments section if I'm off base there. But again, just massively disappointing from the Jets up to this point, and I don't really see a way that this fully rears its head. Again, it's Aaron Rodgers. If he can sort of make some magic happen, if Davante Adams can all of a sudden as well sort of return to his prime form and be able to, link up with Rodgers, I don't know. I think that this is kind of, the ship has sailed a little bit. Now 2-6, you figure you probably have to win at least 9 games to make the playoffs. We talked a number of times on this show about how open I do think that AFC wild card spot is for them. You get a Broncos win yesterday as well. It feels like now at 5-3 there, they're going to be chasing a little bit more. The Ravens, I guess, are technically speaking in the wild card as of the time of this recording, considering their loss this past weekend. We'll see what happens with the Steelers tonight against the Giants, but it feels like the Steelers probably have a pretty good chance tonight. So, it feels like those top 2 wild card spots in, the second place in the AFC North, and the Broncos, it seems like as of now, probably have that solidified, and there's a number of other teams that are sort of vying for that 7 seed. I just think the Jets have too much to overcome at this point to be able to make a playoff push. But if you are a believer in the Jets, let us know what your argument is, because it's crazier things have happened that we've seen, at least in theory, and it's not totally fair to put this on a 40-plus-year-old Aaron Rodgers. We've seen, not this bad, but we've seen Rodgers in the past get off to slower starts out of the gates and be able to put together some runs. So we'll see, but ultimately, I don't think that we're seeing that out of 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. We are going to be moving on here to the Sunday night football game last night, as the 49ers got back in the win column as they were able to hold off a late game rally from the Dallas Cowboys and able to ride themselves to victory and back into the win column heading into their bye week. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's solution shit is stupid. If you choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into the Sunday night football matchup from last night between the Dallas Cowboys and the 49ers. This was a slow start to the game from both of these offenses. You were looking at a 10-6 halftime lead for the Cowboys, but it was the Niners just coming out and punching the Cowboys in the mouth during that third quarter, scoring 21 unanswered points to build up a lead large enough to just be able to sort of run the clock out from there. The Cowboys, as they do seem to do pretty often, sort of worked their way back into this game late with a couple Dak Prescott touchdowns to be able to, shrink the lead a bit, make it a one-score game late in this one, but it was too little too late, and the 49ers hang on 30-24. So, starting with San Francisco here, I think that my biggest takeaway from them is just kind of how well run of an organization they are. Really, obviously, there's bigger keys to the game, but when I watch this 49ers team, they just continue to impress me in terms of the overall, reliability of the 49ers being able to develop young talent. And it's not like any one player, was outstanding in the key to the game, but you look at the way that they have been built on homegrown talent throughout this run for San Francisco. And now what we're really starting to see this season as well is yet another hit on a number of key draft selections. You have Malik Mustafa, who was really, if there were any one player that you wanted to point to last night in terms of that, of the draft class for San Francisco of this past year, Malik Mustafa, with some of the pass breakups that he had, the one in the back of the end zone versus Dallas's tight end, who I had not heard of coming into the game, Brevin Spanford. There was a pass breakup there. He had a big play earlier in the game in the red zone as well. And you just look at this group as a whole, he had the pass breakup, and then the very next play, he was in on a play with his fellow rookie in Renardo Green to force a fumble for Dallas. Now, Dallas got back on it, but it was, him breaking up a pass, being involved on a tackle short of the line to the gain to force the Cowboys to kick a field goal instead. So really impressive stuff from Mustafa these past few weeks. Ricky Pearsall, we're starting to see him a little bit more involved in the offense. Obviously, he's not going to be the primary target for San Francisco based off of, having somebody like George Kittle, who went nuclear last night, 6 catches, 128 yards and a touchdown. Debo, a couple drops ultimately. He had a big play. He had a touchdown pass that was receiving touchdown that was called back due to a penalty at one point as well. But, Debo running open for a lot of the night as well. That Ricky Pearsall quietly can sort of emerge into this offense and, moving forward, I just think is going to. He was one of my favorite wide receivers in the draft coming into last year, and haven't gotten to see a ton of them yet, but I do think that he is going to be a key contributor for this team. Dominic Pooney, who was their third-round selection, he has been as solid as can be, is an above-average starting guard for them, has started every single game for them up to this point, and I just continue to be so impressed with San Francisco and the way that they run their organization. Are they expensive? Yes, absolutely. One of the highest payrolls in the NFL. The reality is the majority of their money goes to homegrown stars, and yeah, they go out and they get a Christian McCaffrey, who's sort of the cherry on top to the rest of the organization. But I mean, I've just continued to be so impressed. You want to mention Isaac Guerendo as well, who sort of takes over for Jordan Mason. Mason, it seemed like, was available at least for the 49ers, but Guerendo was running the ball well. He has for these past couple weeks, going back to that game against Seattle, that he has been a contributor for them. So again, just the 49ers really are, and I know they're 4-4 right now, so I'm not trying to blow up too much smoke up them right now, but I do think that they are one of the best run organizations in the NFL, and other teams should be taking notes. As for other notes on this game, I thought Brock Purdy was all right. The first half was pretty ugly for him. Just on some of these, it's kind of just the margin of error and the fact that he is just slightly off on a number of these throws that sort of results in a little bit lackluster offensive production. Now, that's probably not totally fair of me to say, given the fact that, again, in the third quarter, the 49ers came out on both sides of the ball and just sort of smashed the Cowboys. But, Brock Purdy, I thought he was fine. It is one of those things and not fair, and I don't want to dive into the whole conversation right now, but just this idea of how much money is Brock Purdy going to make? Is he going to be, up with the Dak Prescotts of the world for highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL? I would have serious hesitations about that, but, let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are on the actual value of Brock Purdy from a financial standpoint. Like I mentioned, George Kittle, really just, I think he's due for such a huge second half of the season, given the fact that Ayuk is now injured. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey will take a lot of the touches when he does eventually come back. But, he is, I think, their most reliable offensive target right now. I really do. And, I love me some Deebo Samuel. I think that he is an elite talent as well who can do a ton for you. But really, when it comes down to it, George Kittle just does everything. He had that long 53-yard reception where he was able to get them inside the 5-yard line. And something that I'm kind of surprised the broadcast didn't hit on is the fact that, probably a little bit out of breath, doesn't matter. He stays in the game and he drives one of Dallas's safeties into the end zone for the touchdown. He gives you the entire package as a tight end. And really, it seems like the future of the position is with George Kittle. If you didn't know, by the way, yesterday, National Tight Ends Day. Not that they didn't mention that 1,000 times between Red Zone and the Sunday Night Football broadcast, but he really is the embodiment of what you need from a tight end, and I am nothing short of massively impressed from George Kittle. And, defensively, again, I think the Niners do sort of have the one up on everybody else. The fact that they just went out and shopped for, a pretty cheap version of an all-pro linebacker from a couple years ago in Devondre Campbell, and having him to add to the mix while Dre Greenlaw continues to rehab from that torn Achilles. I mean, he continues to make a number of big plays for them out, inside to stopping the run, out on the perimeter. Now, that being said, the other part of this conversation is the Cowboys and just their lack of nuance in terms of the offense as a whole. They put together their touchdown drive in the first half was a good one. Again, they got some, maybe you want to call it garbage time. I mean, theoretically, they were within reach towards the end of that game, but just too little too late there. The majority of the night, though, was just stagnance from the offense, and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. I mean, you have Dak Prescott, who, he'll make his mistakes. The interceptions certainly weren't good for him last night. It was, him under pressure, trying to take a deep shot into double coverage. Just not a very good decision as a whole. Throws an interception there. The other one going down the left sideline, and it was a very impressive interception from Lenore on the sideline to be able to get up, stay in bounds. So give credit to the defense, I suppose, on both of those instances, but at the same time, just you can't really afford to have those mistakes for Dak, especially the second one, where it just seemed like in that second half, they just kind of got thumped immediately. It was Dak throwing an interception on the first drive and then 2 straight 3-and-outs, and really by that point, it felt like the game was pretty much over for Dallas. But as much as Dak, and obviously the man who just got paid this offseason, he is going to get a lot of the blame, and, deservingly so. The fact that, his stats do look a lot better because of what he was able to do in the fourth quarter. I can't overshadow that it was a fair amount of garbage time points, but you also just look at the situation as a whole, and it continues really, to me, to come down to that offensive line with the Cowboys, which is something I don't want to harp on too long because offensive line talk doesn't do well necessarily, but they have no semblance of a run game whatsoever. They just have a collection now at this point. I mean, Rico Dowell out in this game. A lot of speculation online, at least, about the fact that Ezekiel Elliott, maybe they sat Dowell out on purpose because they didn't want to admit they were wrong on Zeke. I don't want to go down that sort of speculation aspect of it. But, Zeke and Dalvin Cook, if we're talking, 2016, 2018 range, pretty great two-headed monster. In 2024, it's just so disheartening, I feel like, for Cowboys fans, where two of them combined for 16 carries, just 46 yards. Zeke ends up getting in for a touchdown at least to make things, a little bit more interesting when he did so in the second quarter there. But, just zero semblance of a running attack for the Cowboys at this point. I don't know what really the fix is for the Cowboys. I mean, technically they're still alive in this season, but I think it's going to be extremely difficult to buy into this, barring the defense getting healthier and becoming an elite group, which I still don't see it. With the lack of linebacker talent that they have, I definitely push back on the idea that those linebackers in the front seven can all of a sudden, begin to really shut down the run, especially, then you look as well, and when they get out in coverage, not a very strong group there. I don't know. I don't know what it is for the Cowboys that they're going to be able to turn this season around. Again, you're missing a lot of key pieces, especially on that front line, the edge rushers between Parsons, Lawrence, Nealand. In the secondary, you have Deron Bland out. But overall, it is a very concerning defense. Yet again, they were able to get run all over, and I really don't know what's going to change. They're averaging allowing 28 points per game, which is 31st in the NFL. Only team they're better than is the Carolina Panthers. So that is a pretty devastating look for Dallas, and ultimately, I didn't have them as a playoff team coming into this year. They haven't given me anything to sort of make me rearrange my expectation level, especially when you look across the NFC and the amount of talent that is on some of those teams. And, for that wild card race, because hypothetically they could win the NFC East. I don't see that necessarily coming to fruition, and you have a team like the Commanders dominating at the top, or I don't know, they're currently at the top. Pick up another win yesterday. Eagles are certainly in the mix, and then those wild card spots. Feels like we're going to get at least 3 NFC North playoff teams, and then that last spot is definitely up for grabs as well. But I did just mention the Washington Commanders picking up a win. Yesterday we got the matchup of the number 1 and the number 2 overall picks from the 2024 draft as Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels faced off for the first time of their careers. In my opinion, likely to be the first of many matchups between these two teams. So I want to dive into what was one of the craziest moments in the NFL towards the end of this game, with Caleb putting together the touchdown drive, Jaden Daniels responding with the Hail Mary, all of the theatrics that came along with that. So we're going to be diving into that game as well. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into what ended up, for a while, this was not living up to the bill of a quarterback showdown between Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, but ultimately had all the theatrics down the stretch to make for a classic moment between two quarterbacks that should have very bright futures in Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Ultimately, it was Caleb Williams putting together the scoring drive late in this one after the offense had looked entirely stagnant for pretty much the entire game. You saw him put together a couple really nice touchdown drives with halfway through the fourth quarter to make things interesting. The first one coming down to a fumble on the goal line. Very interesting decision there by Shane Waldron. A lot of people, if you're not a Caleb Williams fan, definitely can point to the fact that Caleb was maybe dropping back with a little too much momentum, but I think it's still an insane idea in general to hand the ball off to a lineman in a close game. The stakes like that. Again, sort of let us know in the comments section what your thoughts are in terms of whether or not, that was on Caleb or the coaching staff. But either way, the Bears defense still able to respond, get the Bears the ball back less than 2 minutes later, and Caleb putting together a touchdown drive to take a 15-12 lead with, at that point, 25 seconds left in the game. And then ultimately it was Jaden Daniels on a Hail Mary being able to walk it off. You've probably already seen the clip by now. Was a ridiculous play. Jaden Daniels scrambling around the pocket for a good 12-13 seconds, ultimately letting it rip. Pass going short of the goal line, but it popping up and into the hands of Noah Brown to walk that one off. Truly spectacular. I will say this, I've already seen it, and I understand, fan bases get ahead of themselves and such. A lot of people trying to use this game as evidence. Oh, well, Jaden Daniels is so much better than Caleb Williams, and that's why he won. Not really. Neither one of these quarterbacks were particularly good. Now, Jaden definitely had a much better stat line, 21 of 38, 326 yards and a touchdown. Very fair, and he was the better quarterback in this game. What I might add to that as well, though, is the fact that we are seeing... This is a very good Bears defense, so certainly I don't want to take anything away big picture from Jaden Daniels. This offense has sort of been struggling in the red zone up to this point in the season. They're having to rely a lot on their kicker. I mean, that's why it was as close as it was, because they got into the red zone or, into scoring territory 4 times and were unable to capitalize on any of those opportunities. I want to see here if I can, do a little bit on the fly. I mean, I guess they're not that bad. Commanders are 14th in the NFL in terms of red zone scoring percentage at 56.3%. So maybe not totally a fair claim on my part, but wasn't able to capitalize on some of those drives, kept the Bears in this game despite how much more success their offense was having relative to Chicago's. So maybe something to note at least there, that we've had a couple of these games where that has been the case. Specifically, I'm thinking of this one and the Giants win, where they were pretty reliant on their field goal kicker there. The other side of this as well, I think that, and both of the quarterbacks, I guess, were under duress some. Caleb Williams' offensive line still has really been struggling in pass pro. Now, opening up some holes on the ground game more, which is a huge development for them. Really, if it weren't for DeAndre Swift, the 56-yard run that he broke off and being able to score there, he had 129 yards on the ground. That's huge for them, and it's been a big reason why the Bears offense has looked more competent. Again, take tomorrow out of the picture. They had gone 3 straight games with at least 24 points, and that was not the case early on. The fact that their running game has become a real threat is huge. But, and again, I don't want to give Caleb Williams too many excuses here. The fact of the matter is, you look at ultimately how his day finished. He was 10 of 24, 131 yards, 0 touchdowns. He had, going into the fourth quarter, had, I believe, just 4 completions. So Caleb started, letting it fly a little bit more and started to convert when the moment got brighter, which is encouraging to see. I mean, he gave the Bears the lead with 25 seconds left. It's hard to fully pin this on him, but of course, obviously, the lack of production from their offense against key matchups has been disappointing. The fact that Keenan Allen has been so ineffective up to this point in the year is concerning. Just 2 catches on 7 targets. He's really yet to make an impact. Still doesn't feel like the connection between DJ Moore and Caleb Williams is all that refined up to this point as well. So, I mean, both of these offenses, I think, definitely had their struggles throughout the course of this game. Now, I think that Chicago's defense is far superior to Washington's defense, so I give Jaden Daniels a little bit more of a pass there. But, I mean, what a finish of this game, obviously. Tyreek Stevenson, definitely enemy number 1 in Chicago right now, the way that this all played out. I will say, for those who aren't really familiar with who Tyreek Stevenson is, he is still a very good player. He's been a key contributor for them these past 2 seasons. He's just in his 2nd year. It was massively irresponsible. He'll tell you that. He already spoke out to the media, or at least tweeted out to the media. I don't know if he's had an actual official, appearance in front of them. According to, I think it was Ian Rappaport, tweeted out that Matt Eberflus announced that he already talked to the team and addressed it and apologized for everything. He's a young player. The key is for the Bears to not let this thing spiral, because, again, their defense really is their calling card, and it's why I'm so high on the roster. It's because I do think that there's upside with this offense. More than anything, though, this is an elite defense, and if I'm not mistaken as well, they were without a couple of their key players as well. Kyler Gordon was out in this one. I want to say Jaquan Brisker was as well. So the fact that the Bears defense was able to hold Washington to, it was 18 points. Really, it was less than that outside of that Hail Mary. They played out of their minds once again, and it's why I'm not going to get too down on the Bears after this loss. I do think that, this is a very young team on both sides of the ball, and they clearly showed that in this game. I'm not out on them potentially being a playoff team. The Bears, as things currently stand right now, as I'm trying to pull up the playoff picture right now, they're sitting at 4-3, which would be good for the 8 seed. So they're certainly not out of the mix whatsoever. The issue for the Bears, of course, is the fact that they do have divisional games on the horizon, and they're going to be fighting tooth and nail to be able to survive that, especially with, all 6 of their divisional games in what is the best division in the NFL. So they're going to be having to fight tooth and nail. They have a couple winnable games on their schedule coming up here at Arizona and versus New England in the next couple weeks. So it's, they have to capitalize on those, it feels like, because from there it gets extremely dicey. 2 games against the Packers, 2 games against the Vikings, 2 games against the Lions, and then the only out-of-divisional games they have outside of that are the 49ers and the Seahawks. So this is going to be a very tough stretch for the Bears, not feeling great about their chances as of this moment. I still stand by the identity of this team of I love this defense. I eventually think that Caleb Williams is going to be able to figure it out and put it all together. That being said, you look at where the Bears are currently at right now. They don't have, very high quality wins on their resume right now, where, they've beaten the Titans, the Panthers, the Jaguars, and they do have the Rams as a win as well against a Rams team that was pretty beat up at the time and wasn't beating anybody. So the Bears, as much as I am still high on their future, this might not be the year for them. That's all right, but I do think they're going to have to do a little bit of soul searching internally. The coaching discussion is going to be a very interesting one in terms of Matt Eberflus. Has he done enough to keep his job? I'm not a fan of offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. Again, when it comes down to that goal line opportunity, trying to hand the ball off to a lineman, I understand Caleb Williams could have run it a little bit better. Just still a crazy play call to me in that moment. So, I don't know. I think that the Bears are not in a bad position, but I'm skeptical on what the remainder of this season looks like for them. And on the Commanders side of this, 6-2 is just an incredible, start to the season for them, where they really couldn't ask for much more. They are currently in an excellent position moving forward this season. I think they have a great chance at the playoffs. The question is going to be really them or the Eagles coming down to that NFC East matchup. I really wouldn't want any business with trying to vie for one of those final wild card spots in the NFC. Now, we have seen the Vikings lose 2 straight games. You wonder if there is going to be some regression there. Are they going to be able to stop the spiral at this point, or what? But it feels like division is the best path for them. They have to capitalize on those interdivisional matchups. They have a number of winnable games on their schedule as well. Games against the Giants, or the game against the Giants. They have, of course, 2 against the Cowboys. They have the Titans in there. They have the Saints in there. And even the Falcons, I think, should be very winnable for them. So Commanders have to be feeling great about where they are at. Both of these teams, though, feels like the future is bright and they are headed in the right direction. But, we're talking about youth movement and, showing promise and flashes. Meanwhile, you have a team like the Kansas City Chiefs who just continue to sit at the top of the hill. Everybody doubts them, even though they have proven themselves so much year after year. And I want to discuss whether or not that is fair, of should we have concerns, because it was yet another game of the Chiefs not being able to cover. They allowed the Raiders to keep things close for a lot of this game. They end up winning 27-20. So we're going to be diving into this matchup from Week 8. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into the matchup between the Chiefs and the Raiders that took place yesterday. This was a game that, not very many people expected to be a good one heading into it. Chiefs came into this game as 8.5-point favorites, and the Raiders were able to sort of hang around in this one, and ultimately they fall 27-20 in this game. The Chiefs remain undefeated, but we are still kind of in this weird situation with Kansas City where a lot of people are waiting for a convincing win to show everybody that they are still the dominant Chiefs, and yet I haven't really been able to do so up to this point. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily fair or not. I mean, we saw them pretty convincing in Week 7 against the 49ers. You do look at the way that they have been going about this. 5-0 in one-score games. It's one of those things that really, going back to the Vikings of 2021, I believe it was, when they were 11-0 in one-score games, that is not really a category you want to be in. Then ultimately it was the Vikings falling short in a close game in the playoffs against the Giants in the wild card round. So it's something that, since I feel like that year, I've been keeping an eye on of okay, can you win games convincingly when you need to? My argument would be yes, that the Chiefs have been able to do so, just basically based off of that win against the 49ers, which may not be fair because that's, only 1 out of the 7 games that they've played in. I think it's enough for me. I also very much understand the hesitation and concern if you are a non-Chiefs believer, which, you can dislike them. I still feel like they are at a point where I have a really hard time, betting against Patrick Mahomes and this organization as a whole. But I do want to dive into Mahomes a little bit here because obviously it has been a very rough start to the season for him, where I believe he's at least 1 interception in every single game. He's currently leading the league in interceptions so far this year with 9 relative to just his 8 touchdowns. So we're seeing, really poor numbers from Mahomes, I'd say largely, across the board, at least relative to his standard and being, rivaling for greatest quarterback in NFL history. He's at least in those conversations, but like I mentioned, 9 interceptions. He's already not far off, not even halfway through the season from his career high in interceptions, which was last year with 14. He's having his career low in passing yards per game. That's a little bit concerning, but and the interception is kind of the reason why the Raiders were at least, for a moment there in that game in the third quarter, where at that point, it was the Raiders had just driven down the field, kicked a field goal to make it 17-13, and then Mahomes ends up throwing an interception over the middle of the field. It was Merrig for the Raiders who picks it off, returns it to the Kansas City 3-yard line, and ultimately it's about the Chiefs defense. And that's something that I do think gets so sort of swept under the rug by the casual NFL fan of how impressive this Chiefs defense continues to be, because they would not be back-to-back reigning Super Bowl champs if it weren't for what Steve Spagnuolo and this defense has done for the past couple years. I don't know why Steve Spagnuolo doesn't get any more love in terms of being a potential head coach candidate. Now, he has been a head coach before, if I'm not mistaken. I can double check myself here on the fly here. I mean, it was with the Rams in 2009 through 2011 that he has been there. Also briefly with the Giants as well. I think he might have been the interim there. And the fact that he's just been sitting here as one of the top coordinators in the NFL on what is the, one of the best organizations in the league, I'm just surprised he doesn't get more recognition for it. He's been, coaching his defense to elite heights over the course of these past handful of years, and specifically the past 2, that it has been so impressive the way that they're able to hold up. And again, they find them, like the 49ers, gave the Niners all kinds of praise at the beginning of this show as well in terms of that internal development, and the Chiefs deserve to have those types of conversations as well. I don't even know if they have the same superstar power necessarily as San Francisco has been able to coach up, but again, you don't always need superstars, you just need players who can be available for you, specifically what they've done with their linebackers these past couple years and just sort of making very solid starting caliber linebackers. Almost seems like pulling them out of thin air. Specifically, you look at a Nick Bolton, who really is one of the key guys on that defense. Drew Tranquill, Leo Chenal, they had Willie Gay last season. I mean, they just continue to find ways to get players that play into their system, and I think it's a huge credit to Spagnuolo. And as for this offense, because again, as great as the Chiefs defense has been, and you feel like eventually a time is going to come where that offense has to step up, and ultimately that's where the Patrick Mahomes element of it all, I at least kind of feel like he's going to be able to find a way, but it's definitely been concerning, where this was kind of the first game of the season that we saw the running game sort of really get shut down. Kareem Hunt struggled in this one, 21 carries for 59 yards, and he did score a touchdown early on in this game, but Chiefs as a whole averaged just 2.8 yards per carry. Definitely want to get better from that. Obviously want Patrick Mahomes to be a little bit more settled. I forget who it was. I think I might have mentioned it last week. The fact that somebody on ESPN was talking about how subpar their offensive line is, I don't really think that is the case. The interior of that offensive line is a very solid group. So at some point, I know their tackles definitely have a lot to work on in terms of, hopefully, at least for their sake, that Sua Mataia, who they spent a second-round pick on this past year, who got benched early on in the season for Wanya Morris, that maybe he can emerge as a legitimate starting tackle option for them in the future. Either way, it does feel like it's kind of on Mahomes at a certain point, and I don't want to put it on him too much. Again, they're 7-0 right now, so as much as we want to be critical because it doesn't look perfect, it doesn't look like the Patrick Mahomes we've known for these past handful of years. The results are the results, and the Chiefs have been able to continually win these games. That being said, it's not like they have a ton of awesome resume wins. I mean, weeks 1 and 2 against the Ravens and the Bengals, both of those games very solid. The 49ers game, being able to win that one pretty convincingly. Now, even in that game, you could talk about how the 49ers did lose basically all of their top receiving targets. That definitely played in the Chiefs' favor in that one, but I mean, they get results right now, and you look at the schedule ahead for them, it's very easy, honestly. Outside of they have a game at Buffalo in Week 11, that should be a very entertaining one. They have also one other game, Week 16 against the Texans, which should be good. They have a lot of sort of meh teams on their schedule to the point where it feels like the Chiefs, and I just mentioned the Texans. The Texans are probably I would argue they're the number one threat in terms of, rivaling the Chiefs for that one seed. I know the Bills are also 6-2, which does make that matchup in a few weeks, extra compelling. But Chiefs feel like they should be in very good position to be able to sort of wrap this one up, have the playoffs run through Arrowhead, and then that is a scary scene for any other team in the AFC trying to rival them. But as for this game against the Raiders, we kind of just know who the Chiefs are. On the other side of this as well, I do want to talk about the Raiders briefly, where, Antonio Pierce and some of his decision-making is just sort of unfathomable. And again, Antonio Pierce seems like an awesome guy, somebody that's very easy to root for. I think that his feel for the game has been atrocious for the Raiders up to this point in the year. It was the cowardly punt in Week 1 against the Chargers. Then you look at these past couple weeks as well, the field goal decision to, take it from a 20-12 game and a 1-touchdown game with a few minutes left in the game, kicking that field goal. And then in this game, after that interception from Merrick, like we talked about, and being able to have the chance to, keep things competitive at least there. And I understand you're playing the Chiefs, you're playing not to lose, you're playing to win, all those things. I still feel like we've gotten so carried away with some of the fourth down decisions. Now, they make for good TV and entertainment, and it allows me to sort of sit here, and not that I want to be critical, but it gives us sort of key moments to analyze. And Antonio Pierce, it just feels like all through the season have been on the wrong side of that. And again, when you're talking about that situation on 4th and goal there, just frankly, if I'm a Raiders head coach and I'm looking at what I have in terms of faith in this Raiders offense, featuring a running back who had your lead running back who had just 15 yards on 14 carries, I just don't have confidence in the offense. Like, it's one thing to sort of instill momentum and all those things. I just feel like they totally killed any sort of momentum that they were building up in that moment. And then ultimately, their offense just wasn't able to, do enough from that point on. The Chiefs respond with an 87-yard drive that results in a field goal, keeps the offense off the field for 9 minutes and 43 seconds. Just, I don't know. I think that a lot of shakeups are going to happen for the Raiders. They're probably going to be in for an entire fresh start next season, if I had to guess, probably from both a head coaching standpoint and a quarterback standpoint, that they're probably going to be in the conversation for, they're going to be at the top of the draft. I think they're going to take a quarterback. I think that they're going to go and get a new head coach. Should be very interesting to monitor from here on out. But for our final segment of the day, do want to preview tonight's Monday Night Football game between the New York Giants and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers, led by Russell Wilson, making his second start of the year. Will he be able to have that same level of production against what, at least in my opinion, is a better defense with the Giants? So we're going to be diving into that and more. But before we do so, we are going to take our final break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be previewing tonight's Monday Night Football matchup between the New York Giants and the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is, of course, Russell Wilson's second start of the year, and truly a pivotal one, because of the fact that the Steelers are going into their bye week after this game. And I think at that point is where they have to make a definitive decision on the quarterback. Obviously, Mike Tomlin, all season long, stemming from training camp and preseason through the first 8 weeks of the year, he has been very vague about who the true starting quarterback is. He hasn't necessarily declared either one of them that starter. And I mean, up to this point, the Steelers have been having enough success that it hasn't been overly controversial. Now, the decision to start Russell Wilson going into last week's Sunday Night Football game against the Jets definitely came with a lot of criticism for Mike Tomlin, but sort of the Steelers had a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because of the fact that they were in a position enough at 4-2 to have a little bit of wiggle room, which is probably not quite what the thought process behind the decision was. Ultimately, a lot of people see the 4-2 record for the Steelers and feel like Justin Fields should continue to start for them. I don't think that Justin Fields, and he himself said it, that it's not like he was super convincing in the job that he was doing to be able to win it. This is now sort of where I think they have to get into a point where the locker room definitively knows who that quarterback is. And it feels like all of the momentum is in Russell Wilson's favor as of right now. I mean, obviously, the 37 points that they scored against the Jets last week was a season high for them. You look at the connection that he was able to establish with George Pickens last week, even if it was just sort of throwing up those 50-50 balls and George Pickens being the monster that he is coming down with them. Had 5 catches for 111 yards last week with a touchdown. That he appeared to be better. Najee Harris seemed to really be embracing Russell Wilson as well. That I do feel like this is Russ's job to lose now at this point. This weekend's going to be, or tonight's game is going to be a pretty decent test against a very solid Giants defense. I wouldn't call them elite, especially with all of the injuries that they're dealing with, but a Giants defense that has certainly turned some heads this season, and I think is a good test from here on out. So ultimately, what does that look like? What are the keys to the game for them? I think that number one would be, once again, establishing George Pickens. It's no secret that ultimately the Steelers, outside of George Pickens, really don't seem to have a ton of threats on the perimeter, where it's George Pickens. I like Pat Freiermuth as a tight end option, not exactly, a burner by any means. And outside of that, it's just a lot of guys that are kind of hit or miss on a week-to-week basis, that if the Steelers offense wants to be able to replicate last week's success on a regular basis, George Pickens has to be involved. Again, whatever that may be, last week it was very much relying on him just sort of winning those jump balls. Russ would like to see him be a little bit sharper on some of those passes, but I wonder what other kinds of aspects to the game that they could try and incorporate to get him involved. I think another huge key for this Steelers offense is the fact that, similar to what we saw from Justin Fields early on in his debut and really his first couple games with the Steelers, is last week, Russell Wilson not throwing over the middle of the field. 0 passes at or inside the hash mark. Now, I understand that's, a pretty small sample size to be working with there, but I don't know, at least from an outside observer, it seems like maybe some of the strategy for Pittsburgh, for Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator early on in this game, was to sort of keep maybe put the training wheels on their quarterbacks a little bit, not have them throw into high-risk areas in the middle of the field. I anticipate that we're going to see some more of that from Russell Wilson tonight, similar to we saw Justin Fields on a week-to-week basis start to attack the middle of the field, because ultimately it's a huge part of the game. And obviously, Russell Wilson was able to have success last week throwing outside the numbers and sort of picking up some smaller plays added to, a couple of those chunk plays deep for Pickens, but Russell Wilson, that is kind of, when you think in theory, what can Russell Wilson do that Justin Fields can't? It is a little bit more on the processing side of things, because even after last week, and Russell Wilson was good, but I did have this thought process of, okay, well, Justin Fields can also throw 50-50 balls to George Pickens. Now, it wasn't happening at the frequency, or at least the success rate that the Steelers were hoping for, so you have to give some credit to Russell Wilson, but ultimately, those types of throws I didn't come away overly impressed with. Those moon balls or moon shots, whatever Chris Collinsworth kept calling them last week, I don't think that that's an extremely high difficulty level of throw. And who am I to say this as somebody who's never played a game of quarterback in my life? But just saying, I think that, Russell Wilson needs to be able to really differentiate himself. And I do think from the maturity and the leadership standpoint and just the understanding of the game, he flashed a lot of those qualities in that win last week against the Jets. But obviously, as we've seen even further so, given yesterday's action, the Jets aren't exactly a barometer of great football. And I don't know if the Giants are necessarily that either, but they have playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Not that the Jets are totally without them as well, but the Jets are also pretty banged up. I don't know. It's a weird situation for Russell Wilson, and obviously he is the main X factor for this Steelers team, and I think that tonight plays a pivotal role on what the Steelers look like moving forward heading into this bye week, as they're going to have enough time to really assess in-house between what are the pros and cons to Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. On the other side of this, for the New York Giants, this is a game where at this point, the Steelers are 6-point favorites. They are expected to win this game. I think even more noteworthy in terms of, Giants disrespect maybe is the fact that the over-under for this game, I believe, is 36.5. Extremely low line there, and I think that it is probably a bet to some degree on that the Giants offense isn't going to be able to have success against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, which I can definitely understand. What I will say is this, and this might be a little bit unfair and off base, but I really don't think that the Steelers defense has been elite this year. They've certainly been good, but you look, they are in the bottom half of the league in terms of passing defense. We've seen teams been able to drive on them a little bit. I'm not saying that they're a bad group by any means, but as we mentioned, the fact that they are 22nd in passing defense in the NFL this season, that's where you look to Daniel Jones, and it feels like one of those situations where, that is certainly not ideal, and I don't know if that's the guy I want necessarily to have so much power in this type of a matchup. That's where Malik Nabers gets involved, because ultimately Nabers is a good enough talent that obviously it matters who's at quarterback, but if you get the ball in his hands, he's capable of special things, and I don't know. I don't think that the Steelers secondary is necessarily elite. They have good players, and players that I really like in Joey Porter Jr. and Minkah Fitzpatrick. Last week we saw as well, it was Beanie Bishop playing the nickelback for them, who had a special game in that matchup against the Jets that maybe they are shaping into form a little bit more. Maybe the fact that their passing defense is ranked as low is because they've been able to, sort of sit on leads a little bit more. But Malik Nabers, I do think, has a chance to have a huge impact on this game. The type of pressure that TJ Watt and company are going to be able to bring on that front line. That Giants offensive line now, especially without Andrew Thomas at the left tackle spot, is certainly susceptible to pressure. Last week we saw them allow 8 sacks against the Eagles, and I think that the Steelers defense is better. So can Daniel Jones make the quick decisions, get the ball out on time? Can the Giants avoid these negative plays and get the ball into the hands of their number one playmaker in Malik Nabers? That is really going to be the key for them. And, obviously defensively, it's can you sort of eliminate Can you shut down the Steelers offense led by Russell Wilson? Ultimately, I do like this Giants defense a lot. The fact that they are, I want to double check what the injury report looks like for this game before I say anything definitive here, but I believe they are still without Kayvon Thibodeau. Huge loss for them there. Outside of that, defensively, it looks like we have a couple D-backs that are questionable for the Giants as well. Adoree Jackson has been ruled out. Looks like Trey Hawkins and Cordell Flott are questionable and doubtful respectively. So they're going to have, a lot that needs to go in their favor for this game. I think that, probably a lot of it revolves around being able to shut down the run for starter, to not give Russell Wilson all of this time and, comfortability in the situation, sort of get him rattled early. Last week we saw him get out to a slow start. Obviously there was a lot of rust that he had to shake off, considering the fact that he had been out for the first 6 weeks of the season. This is a situation where you have to put Russell Wilson to the test. You have to sort of coax him into compromising positions. I don't think that I have that type of confidence in the Giants, though, so I am going to go with the Steelers -6 in this game. It's a big spread that I don't love necessarily, and, it's the reason why it wasn't in our best bets from last week, but I think Steelers -6 is where I'm leaning in this situation, and I don't know. 36.5 is such a hard read with given how low the line is. I guess my gut would tell me to go under in this game. The Steelers just last week did top that single-handedly without the Jets involved. So, I don't know. I think that one is a huge toss-up. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well, as we actually do have one quick comment here that we want to address here from Kirito, who says, Tua Tagovailoa trade rumors are happening. If Tua gets traded, which team do you think will trade for him? We had this conversation. We had a similar comment about Matt Stafford. It was last Thursday before that Thursday night football game. And as you sort of look across the league, I just don't know how many teams are necessarily in the quarterback market, especially sort of given the weird price tag with Tua and the injury history there. Hypothetically, if the Dolphins were to make a trade, I wonder if you could see a team like, I don't know, the Panthers maybe, the Raiders maybe, like one of these teams that are obviously at the bottom of the NFL. Because truthfully, I don't have a ton of faith in this year's upcoming draft class for quarterbacks. Now, we'll see. Still a lot of football to be played in college football this year. Nobody has really impressed me all that much in terms of, who I'd really want to tie myself to. So for some of these teams that don't necessarily feel great about it either, maybe you could see, maybe the Saints could talk themselves into it as well in terms of, their season is likely over at 2-6, but also I don't think that anybody in the NFC South is really all that great. They have some games against divisional opponents coming up. Would be interesting to see. As Kirito says, heard Seahawks and Browns already made an offer. I actually, the Seahawks just crossed my mind, honestly, as you mentioned that the comment is, or the question as well, that could the Seahawks do so? I think that it's tough because that Seahawks offensive line is a disaster right now. Geno Smith has been running for his life basically all season long up to this point. And they already do have a good amount of money wrapped up in him, albeit I think that he becomes a restricted free agent or an unrestricted free agent this upcoming offseason. So we could see if maybe the Seahawks could make a move there. I doubt it. And then as for the Browns as well, they just spent so much money on Deshaun Watson, of course, and they're stuck with that contract that I think both the Seahawks and the Browns probably have too much money wrapped up in the quarterback position right now, which is kind of why I lean a team like the Panthers who, have pretty much a clean slate after this year. It doesn't seem like Bryce Young is going to be sticking around there in Carolina. The Saints aren't necessarily great financially either, even though I was just talking myself into them. I think that I could see it. The Giants would be an interesting team as well, I think, honestly, because Daniel Jones does have an out in his contract after this year. I think the Giants are certainly not picking that one up. So, there are options out there. Maybe the Titans, too, is the last team to throw out there. But I don't see Tua getting moved this season. I think that there's just been too much baggage there already that the Dolphins are going to want to see things through here with Tua, do right by him. Mike McDaniel has spent so much of his time these past couple years really building up Tua's confidence that it feels uncharacteristic, I think, of McDaniel to, be a part of a move off of this guy after everything that he's been through. But I do think that, you could potentially see, I think it's unlikely. I think you could potentially see a move or two of this offseason, given, again, a little bit of a lack of confidence in a lot of these quarterback prospects for the 2025 NFL draft. But again, that is all the time we have for today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern, where we want to answer all of your questions. So we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.